It seems like people have a lot of grievances nowadays with the gaming industry, specifically with the big three, Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft. And and I don't know, it just seems like all three of these companies are not what they used to be. It seems like people are becoming increasingly frustrated with each. And don't get me wrong, each company has their own respective weaknesses, but they also have their strengths as well. And when it comes down to like press and publicity in relation to 2026, it seems like Sony has been on the receiving end of a lot of negative publicity this year with all the lawsuits, all the complaints, the backlash regarding the cancellation of physical media. Um, aggressive price hikes in relation to video games and accessories and all that other stuff. The cost of gaming is just going up in general, and it's something that a lot of people are very unhappy about, especially considering how rough the economic climate is right now. And it begs to question which company of the three is actually the worst. You look at Nintendo. They have basically been going at it with gamers back and forth for the past couple of years in regards to shutting down fan projects and ROM sites and trying to combat emulation and piracy and all that other stuff, even to a point where they can brick your Switch 2 console, which should be like illegal, but at the same time, since it's something manufactured by Nintendo, I guess they can do that. Um, you look at I guess their online infrastructure. There's like a lot of lagging in relation to their online service. Obviously, Nintendo's online structure is not as good as, Sony's or Microsoft's in relation to PlayStation and Xbox. And Nintendo hasn't really been big in terms of like online gameplay. And I think that's one of the reasons why they've been like number three for the most part prior to like the Nintendo Switch era, because I feel like I want to say from the late teens onwards, like Nintendo was like number two in terms of like who is in the lead during the console wars. It felt like for the most part, Sony's been number one, and then I want to say prior to the Nintendo Switch, I feel like Xbox was number two because of the Xbox 360 and how how big that was and how successful that console was. But with the Xbox One and the Xbox Series X, I don't know. I feel like those consoles haven't been selling as much as, the original Switch console or the PlayStation 4 or the PlayStation 5 or anything like that. And then you look at Microsoft and you look at like their faults, it seems um like Xbox for the most part lost its appeal, like after the 360 era. And it feels like Xbox One has just been an alternative to whatever Sony puts out. Like Xbox One just felt like an alternative to PlayStation 4 because it felt like more third party games shined on that particular platform they did on the PS4. Same can be said with this current generation of gaming with the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5, because I feel like most of their first party IPs lost their appeal like a long time ago. And the reason I say that is because you look at like the major active franchises that you would see on Xbox. You would see like Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, Diablo, StarCraft, just a couple of names in terms of like, IPs. And you also had the acquisition with Activision Blizzard that took place a couple of years ago. And and I think like it was worth like billions of dollars, like 68.7 like $1 billion. And I don't know. I feel like for the most part, they've lost more than they've gained, because you look at the major IPs, like Call of Duty for the most part has gone to hell. And it's to a point where I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I honestly feel like they should make new Call of Duty games every other year opposed to every year because I feel like oversaturation has killed Call of Duty because the last three major entries that we've gotten have been bad for the most part, especially Black Ops 7, which is probably one of the worst entries in the series. We're supposed to be getting a new Black Ops game, I think, a little bit later this year. And the trailer looks better than anything I saw in Black Ops 7, but we'll see how well the game does when it does come out. But the IPs I've mentioned in relation to Microsoft or anything that's on Xbox, like most of them are dead. Not dead, but like they're just irrelevant, you know? Like StarCraft has been irrelevant for God knows how long. Same thing with Warcraft. Overwatch is still a thing with Overwatch 2, but I still feel like, Overwatch 2 is not as popular as the original Overwatch game from a decade ago. Um, you have like other like classic IPs like Guitar Hero, which has been dead for like a decade. You have Crash Bandicoot, which I don't know. I just feel like it's been irrelevant like for the past several years. The remakes of the older Crash Bandicoot games is something that fueled a lot of nostalgia. And when we got the Insane trilogy, that actually did pretty well. But anything new, it seemed like it's a hard pass to a lot of people. I think we're supposed to be getting a new Spyro the Dragon game next year, and a lot of people are ecstatic about that. And also we have like a new CEO within Xbox, and I think the CEO had made like 3,200 layoffs, and the studio closures and layoffs are obviously a result of Xbox like losing millions of dollars, and the fact that hardware sales have basically lagged significantly behind its competitors in Nintendo and PlayStation. And not only that, it seems like Xbox as a brand had shifted away from what made it unique and popular. You look at the original Xbox console from 2001. A lot of people liked what they saw in relation to the presentation, the design, the futuristic interface, the Y2K aesthetics. That's something that you stop seeing as time goes by, especially with Xbox One and Series X, because they feel more, I don't know, it just feels more generic in terms of tone, and I think that's something that it doesn't really impress a lot of people. I feel like the original Xbox along with the Xbox 360 had better aesthetics, which is something that was eye-catching for the most part. And and I don't know, you look at like Xbox and you look at like some of their um IPs, like their more popular stuff like Halo, you got the Forza Horizon series, you got Gears of War. Um, like those three names that I just mentioned, I feel like are more popular than some of the classic, IPs that Microsoft owns that have been irrelevant for quite some time. But I don't know. I just feel like from maybe Halo 3 onwards, like I don't know, Halo hasn't been the same. Like during the I want to say from like maybe Halo 4 onwards, like Halo hasn't really been the same. People said that Halo 3 was like the last really good Halo game. They'll say Halo 5 Guardians is all right. Um Halo 4 was not everybody's cup of coffee, and you had Halo Infinite. Started off good. I think it had like 20 million players at one point, and then over time it just, people just didn't really care about it anymore. I think the servers might still be up for Halo Infinite, but I don't think people really care as much. Obviously, they're trying to make Gears of War relevant again because we're getting a new game. Um, yeah, I mean, I feel like Microsoft has the opportunity to turn things around with Xbox because it seemed like people are starting to sour on Sony and they're starting to sour on PlayStation. So much so where I think gamers are planning on boycotting PlayStation in late August. So I feel like this is Microsoft's opportunity to make a big comeback, and they can become like maybe like number one within between like the big three and within the console wars. People say the console wars are over, but I still feel like it might be a thing still because people are still they're still trying to decide what they're going to buy in relation to this generation of gaming. Like consoles and games and all that stuff is just expensive in general, but I don't know. You have to look at what you're being offered, like what you're paying for, what you're getting out of it in return. What are the pros and cons? And I don't know, like, is it something that I'm comfortable with? Is it something that I can enjoy? Because I feel like when it comes down to fun factor and gameplay experience, I feel like that's where Nintendo shines the most because most of their IPs are really old, but they're still fresh. Like you look at Super Mario, you look at The Legend of Zelda, you look at Pokemon, you look at Smash Brothers. They've been around forever, but at the same time, the IP are still fresh because we get new entries, which add something like new compared to what you've seen in previous entries while keeping the same formula. And they still end up being massive sellers because they're all first party games that generate tons of revenue for Nintendo in general. So I feel like that's Nintendo's biggest strength. Um, and I talked about like I wouldn't say their weaknesses, but the issues that Nintendo has had with consumers and with gamers. And then you look at Sony. I mean, Sony, like their biggest IPs I can think of off the top of my head are God of War, Marvel Spider-Man, The Last of Us, and that's pretty much it. I honestly feel like I don't know, anything Marvel related is something that is going to do big sales numbers for like the PlayStation 5 or anything PlayStation related. I think they had like Astrobot, which came out like a year or two ago, which was a massive success. Sony has to focus more on creating like high profile, like first party IPs that connect with fans, And there's been like a lot of complaints against like Sony and against PlayStation over the years, especially post COVID with aggressive pricing and for like the upgrades and stuff like that. Um, the price of their controllers are insane. Last time I checked, at a store, it was like over $100 for a PlayStation 5 controller, which is I don't know what to say about that when a controller costs more than an actual game that's like brand new. And like on average, like a brand new game is like $80. Um, Sony has been getting a lot of flack for like microtransactions in their games and stuff like that. Cause I think that was a major issue with Gran Turismo 7, which came out a couple of years ago. And the microtransactions in that game were so bad to a point where it hurt the overall quality of the game. It just became an afterthought shortly after its release. And I want to say that game came out like in 2022 or somewhere around that time period. But I feel like the Gran Turismo series has just been dead for a while. Like Gran Turismo Sport in a lot of people's eyes was okay, but I don't know. Like Gran Turismo 7, in my opinion, like was not nearly as popular as Sport. And I feel like by the time we got to Gran Turismo Sport, like it seemed like the series was just living off its name value because a lot of people go on record and tell you that Gran Turismo was at its peak during the 2000s. In fact, the racing genre of gaming was at its peak during the 2000s, um, and PlayStation just so happened to profit off of it more than like the other game systems have. And like nowadays, like Gran Turismo doesn't seem like it's like the top racing franchise in gaming. A lot of people will go on record and tell you that's Forza Horizon. So I feel like, in relation to the racing genre of gaming, Microsoft and Xbox has surpassed, Sony PlayStation overall. But it makes you wonder, what's going to become of Sony if people are this discontent and they threaten to boycott, the PlayStation 6. I mean, that's something that can potentially tank, that entire brand, and it makes you like wonder like what direction is Sony going in? Is Microsoft, moving towards a direction like more so towards like, cloud-based gaming and all that? And Nintendo. I know Nintendo like they're all about like gameplay experience and all that stuff. But I think they have like game cards or game key cards or something like that, where you get. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but it's like you have the game, but you don't have the entire game. You have to go online in order to gain access to like the full game or something like that. But but yeah, it seems like everything is starting to become more digital slowly but surely. And on one hand, it's more convenient for video game companies in relation to production and I guess them cutting back on manufacturing costs. But on the other hand, players are going to be upset because they won't own what they buy. And they're afraid that if they lose their console, then they're going to lose their game. Or if whatever company, whether it's like, PlayStation or what have you, if they decide to delete your account, you lose your game and you're not going to get a refund. So there's all kinds of concerns, in relation to, I guess, having a console where you won't have any physical media, everything is just digital. But but yeah, I mean, in relation to 2026, a lot of people go on record and say that Sony has been the worst. Last year, people would tell you that maybe Nintendo was probably the worst because of all the grievances that that company had against it, the backlash that Mario Kart World had just for like one little thing. Um, and I feel like with Xbox, it seems like there's been all kinds of closures and layoffs. So that's obviously, not a good sign for like, Microsoft. And it wasn't a good sign for Microsoft last year. But it's not just like, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. There's been layoffs going. It's been happening like, all around. You look at what's going on with Warner Brothers and, the merger with Paramount, like WB Games. Um, future is still in question. We have no idea what's going to happen with that. Um, obviously, Sony has like buyer's remorse with Bungie because they spent like 3.6 billion on it, and when you think about it, what did Sony really gain in the long run? So it's just like I don't know, it just put them in an awkward position. But I think the main thing that Sony has going for them is that the PlayStation 5 is actually doing pretty well in terms of sales. But I don't know, like the PS5 has been out since late 2020, I believe. And I don't think it's reached like 100 million yet or anything like that. I feel like the PlayStation 5 should have sold more than it did, but I don't know. I mean, it's really expensive and maybe it's a supply and demand issue. They don't have enough PS5s to, go around. So I have no idea. But yeah, it really depends on what you look for in video games, what you look at when you look at companies like Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo in terms of like which company is the best and which company is the worst. Because I feel like by the time we get to 2028, um, PlayStation, Sony, they're not going to be number one anymore. It's quite possible that Nintendo or Xbox is going to take that spot if Sony decides to follow through on deleting physical media or just getting rid of physical media altogether. Um, I feel like this is Microsoft's big opportunity to really, grab the number one spot if people continue to sour on Sony. Um, if, Nintendo, I guess, if they find a way to compensate with like, they try to compensate for all like the lawsuits and the stuff like that involving like fans and gamers and stuff like that through like good games and unique gameplay experiences and stuff like that, then I feel like they could be number one because Nintendo's been number one before and I'm pretty sure it's something that can happen again. But let's be real, Microsoft has better technology and all that stuff. They have like a lot of IPs at their disposal that they can reboot. But but I don't know, like gaming has become very complicated because not everything is about like specs and graphics and stuff like that. Because I feel like that's something that Microsoft and Sony has focused on a lot in relation to their consoles, and obviously they do matter, but like graphics are important. At the same time, you want a game with like high replay value. You don't want half a game and then you got to pay for the rest after you spent like $80 buying certain games and stuff like that. I feel like that's what it is. You got like an unfinished game with a shit ton of DLC, and then you got like microtransactions up the ass, and it's just like it's not fun. It's not fun, and that's not even including the accessories you have to pay for, and along with the online game pass you have to get for whether like be PlayStation or Xbox. It's not even including those things. So that coupled with like how tough things are nowadays economically, it's like it's almost impossible to get a um highly enjoyable gameplay experience depending on what type of game you're playing. Online gameplay is something that's popular for like a year or so, and then people really don't care about it as much, especially if you're getting a brand new game year after year. So yeah, there's like tons of things wrong with the gaming industry, from microtransaction to oversaturation, um to the cost of like gaming constantly increasing, um to just like poor decision making, and just games flopping, and lack of originality, and I don't know, there's just all kinds of things wrong with the gaming industry. But the thing is, 2027 looks very promising because there's so many high profile games coming out next year. And the way things are looking, it's probably going to be one of the biggest years that we've seen within the gaming industry since 2023. But yeah, with that being said, it really depends on like what your preference is in terms of like video games. If you are a PlayStation, Nintendo, or an Xbox type of person, in terms of which one has been the worst in relation to this year, I'd probably say Sony. But overall, that's something that's a little bit, it's kind of tricky to really answer, because everybody has their own opinion. Which console do you think is the best so far, and which company do you think is the worst of the three?